Good afternoon and welcome to the 22nd meeting of 2020 of the Finance and Constitution Committee. The only item on our agenda today is to take evidence on the UK Internal Market Bill. That will be taking evidence from the Right Honourable Michael Gove MP, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. We're required to conclude this particular session by 4:30 and members have been asked to keep their questions succinct. Can I therefore ask Mr Gove if he could do the same with his answers? In saying that, I warmly welcome Mr Gove to our meeting and invite him to make a short opening statement should he wish to do so.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's very kind of you to invite me to answer questions today, and I'm very happy to move straight to the question and answer session. And I'm very grateful to you for making it so easy for us to have this session virtually today.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Minister. Minister, we've heard a lot of substantial and wide-ranging issues raised with us about fundamental questions about the impact of the bill on devolution. Let me give you three quick examples. Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee have said the proposals in the Internal Market White Paper to set in law the principles of mutual recognition and non-discrimination will effectively create new reservations in areas of devolved competence. Professor Michael Dugan, University of Liverpool, told us the operation of the UK internal market has real potential to limit the capacity of devolved institutions to pursue different economic or social choices from those made in London. And the National Farmers Union in Scotland told us the mutual recognition and non-discrimination proposals would in effect drive a coach and horses through the concept of commonly agreed frameworks. Are they not correct? And how will the UK government address these concerns? Mr Gove.
Well, thank you very much, Convener. That goes to the heart of what I know is a live debate. But the UK Internal Market Bill, combined, of course, with the additional powers that the Scottish Parliament and other devolved legislatures gain as a result of our departure from the European Union, results in a net accretion of power to the Scottish Parliament. It's a power surge. And as a result of this combination of measures, the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government will be stronger within the framework of the United Kingdom.
So all these people I've just talked about, and you'll hear more, are wrong.
Well, one of the things about the National Farmers Union is that it's supportive, as I understand it, of the principle of an internal market, and it believes quite rightly that it's important that high-quality Scottish produce should have unfettered access to the rest of the United Kingdom. We need to ensure that, and we can do that through both common frameworks and the bill.
So the wide-ranging concerns that have been expressed by many organisations, you'll hear a bit more this afternoon, are going to be ignored, Mr Gove.
No, I think we take account of every concern, but some of them I think are misplaced. There's been some misinformation and myth-making about the legislation. I think it's important to recognise that while the whole United Kingdom was in the European Union, the operation of all of our legislatures was constrained by EU law. Now that we're outside, all of the legislatures will have more power.
Okay, I'm sure some of the rest of my colleagues will want to pick up on that, but I want to deal with one of the UK amendments, which if passed would mean that a manner of sale requirements not within the scope of the mutual recognition principle. However, that's only part of the picture, is it not? Our committee advisor points out in relation to minimum pricing for unit for alcohol, for example, the restrictions on prices will still be subject to the non-discrimination principle, and in particular, the proportionality principle that protected the Scottish scheme for minimum unit pricing for alcohol is noticeably absent from the bill. Is this amendment therefore not an overt admission by the UK government that despite the protestations to the contrary, that minimum unit pricing was not covered by the bill, it always was, and this amendment might not even have the effect of protecting minimum unit pricing if any significant changes are required to it?
No, I disagree with that. I think the first thing to say is that when the Scottish Government wanted to introduce minimum unit pricing, of course, it was challenged under European law. Of course, minimum unit pricing was secured. It would never have been threatened by this legislation. But given the concerns that have been raised, we saw that there was no harm in putting in capital letters, as it were, that guarantee. Now, of course, if the Scottish Government applied minimum unit pricing, or indeed the UK Government applied minimum unit pricing in England in a way that was discriminatory, if we said, for example, that alcoholic drinks that were produced in England would be subject to a different pricing mechanism to alcoholic drinks that were manufactured or produced or distilled in Scotland or Wales. That would be covered by the bill. But the principle of minimum unit pricing and the idea that wherever alcohol is produced, if it's sold in Scotland, then there needs to be that regulation in place, is not, never was, and never will be harmed by this legislation.
So is that you then, in these circumstances, Mr. Gove, accepting that if the bill's amended in this way, that any substantive changes to the current minimum unit pricing for alcohol could be challenged on the basis of non-discrimination principle?
No, not current practice. But were it to be the case, purely for the sake of argument, that the Welsh Government were to say that whisky produced in Scotland were to have a different minimum alcohol unit price than whisky produced in Wales, then that could be contested. But if the Welsh Government said that all whisky in Wales has to be subject to minimum unit alcohol pricing, then it could do so and it could set the price as it wishes.
Well, I think there'll be a bit of debate to go on about that as we move on, Mr. Gove. Mr. Murdo-Fraser, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, Mr. Gove. Can I ask you about a different aspect of the bill, please, and the financial assistance powers that feature in Part 6 of the bill, which gives UK ministers the power to provide financial assistance in all parts of the United Kingdom and what otherwise would be devolved areas. And I wonder if you can explain to us what the thinking is behind these particular powers and how you would intend they would be used.
Yes, I think it's important to recognise that these are powers that would augment the capacity of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to invest in the welfare of the people of Scotland. But by its very nature, a union, the United Kingdom, or any union, is more than the sum of its parts. And there can be investment in projects which benefit all parts of the union. So, as a for instance, and I'm saying this without prejudice to future investment, we've seen how the new or revived Borders rail line has benefited the people of the Scottish Borders in Edinburgh. It would be entirely possible to conceive of a further linkage down to Carlisle or elsewhere, which would be an example of cross-union connectivity. Investment in that would mean investment in both Scotland and in England, but it would be to the benefit of both. We already have a Borderlands deal, which is one that recognises the economic integrity of the borders in lots and lots of different ways. And so it's entirely in that principle that we would seek to invest.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one follow-up question to that, Convener, if I may. We've heard some concern that what these powers will do is seek to supplant the existing Barnett formula. But what you seem to be saying is that this would be additional spending over and above the Barnett formula. The Barnett formula would be sacrosanct. You, like me, might think it's curious that there are politicians who want to rip up the Barnett formula, who are suddenly very concerned about preserving it. But perhaps you can give us a guarantee that the Barnett formula is being protected, and any spending under this head will be additional to that and not to replace it.
Totally. We're absolutely committed to the Barnett formula. It recognises that there are unique circumstances in Scotland because of history and geography that mean that the level of per capita spending in Scotland is higher, and therefore that is reflected in the block grant. That's completely unaffected. But as we've seen during the recent COVID crisis, the broad shoulders of the UK Treasury mean that we are able to provide assistance to every part of the United Kingdom on top of the Barnett formula and any Barnett consequentials.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, we'll now go to Alec Rowley, please.
Thank you. Mr. Gove, in terms of this actual bill itself, you mentioned earlier the common frameworks. I think there was a view in Scotland that most of the objectives would be achievable through common frameworks. Therefore, the question's been asked, why is there a need for this bill when we could actually make the progress and deliver what needs to be delivered through common frameworks?
Well, common frameworks can do a lot, but they can't do everything. And one of the things that common frameworks do is that they cover certain specific sectors, whether that's food and feed or the application of the chemicals and so on. But they are sector specific. The bill provides cross-cutting support in order to ensure that Scottish businesses and Scottish individuals can have unimpeded access to the rest of the UK market. And of course, it is the case that officials in the Scottish Government are working with officials in the UK Government and other administrations, because they recognise that while frameworks can do a lot, they can't do everything. There are some things which frameworks cover which are outside the scope of the market. There are some things which are market related, and then there are some other market related provisions which frameworks sadly don't provide the reassurance on. But I'm glad that we're making progress on frameworks without prejudice to the different views that people might take of the bill.
Yeah, okay. I think in terms of it would be good to be more specific, but around what cannot be covered by frameworks, but we can come to that. I think one of the big concerns that people have in this bill is looking to future trade bills. So in the evidence that we've taken, a good example of this was given to us, where it was around the sale of cosmetics that were tested on animals. Now, as we know just now, that is banned under EU law. But this bill could pave the way so that if there was a future trade deal done with a country that was for cosmetics, it would be excluded, because the issue is that the objection to the testing the animals is an animal welfare objection. It's not to say that the cosmetics would be a health problem. So under this paper, or under this legislation, that's an example that's been given to us where Scotland could be forced against its will to basically sell on the shelves in Scotland cosmetics that do not that are tested on animals. That's not our policy just now. So there's an example, but there's a lot of examples like that where Scotland currently has the powers. You talk about a power surge to Scotland. We currently have those powers to the EU that we would not have, and a government at UK level would have to legislate.
Let me provide you with reassurance on that. There have been all sorts of myths like these that have been put about, which are nonsense. They're stories to scare children at bedtime, not real reflections of policy. The UK government has been a world leader when it comes to animal welfare. Outside the EU, we can, for example, limit live animal exports, and we can also ban the import of fur. It's already been the case that the UK government has led not just Europe but the UK in animal welfare, introducing, for example, Lucy's Law, the law against puppy farming. We were the first jurisdiction within the United Kingdom to introduce CCTV in slaughterhouses to ensure that the end of life for animals was protected as rigorously as possible. The idea that the UK government would somehow compromise our high animal welfare standards is for the birds. And I think that there are all sorts of people who want to try to suggest that this legislation would lead to a race to the bottom. But economists will always say, look at the revealed preference. Look at how folk have acted in the past if you want to know how they'll act in the future. And this UK government, like previous UK governments, when it comes to environmental and animal welfare and other standards, has been a world leader. The other thing about the EU is, of course, within the EU, the rules are set by qualified majority voting, and outside the EU, it will be the case that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament will have more powers than they would inside. Now, I know that there are some in Scotland who argue that an independent Scotland should seek membership of the European Union. That would see a diminution, not an expansion, of Scotland's power, sovereignty and autonomy.
But the point there is that it may be that your government has this good record on animal welfare. The point is that under this legislation, a future UK government could decide to do a trade deal with a company that they put aside these standards. You in Westminster would have the power to do that. We in Scotland would have no power to stop that. That's the problem. But given there's a lot of people wanting to come in, my final question is around, because another big concern in Scotland is around our health services and other public services. And again, it's looking to the future and looking to possible trade deals that would be done that would compromise our rights in Scotland to say that we are not putting sections of our health service, for example, into the private sector. Now, I do know that the bill says that health and social care are not part of mutual recognition and that they will be exempt. However, it's been pointed out to us by a number of witnesses that on the exclusion in Schedule 2, it's worth saying that under Clause 16.2, Secretary of State has the power to add or remove those exclusions by regulation. So again, those powers sit in Westminster to remove those exclusions for our public services, and we in Scotland and our government in Scotland would have no right or ability to stop that. Surely that's not a power suds. Surely that's a power grab.
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, it may be a lurid fantasy of some that it's the secret agenda of a government to use this as a Trojan horse to privatise parts of the NHS. But it's one of the most absurd, ludicrous and frankly irrational fantasies that I've heard in my political lifetime. The reason that we are so clear about this is because our NHS is not for sale under any circumstances. There are some people who are anxious, as I know, to spread myths about the UK government. But again, if you look at the evidence, you can see the way in which we've chosen not just to legislate, but to invest in our NHS in an unprecedented way. So I think the whole thing is ludicrous. You could theoretically say that a future Scottish Parliament could vote to abolish support for farmers. And since that's a theoretical possibility, then it's a danger. But rather than looking at these fantasies, I think it's better to look at the reality. And the reality is that Scotland's farmers and Scotland's health system are better within the United Kingdom and within the United Kingdom internal market. And nobody has yet seen or produced any evidence to suggest the contrary.
But can I just say, I'm a devolutionist, but can I say to you, it's not about you saying these governments will never do this. You're creating the legislation that will allow that to happen, and that's the key difference. And if you have no intent to see these things happen, then why create the legislation that will allow that to happen? That's why the people of Scotland are revolting en masse around these issues, and it's why you will pave the way to independence in Scotland, not the SNP, but you and your friend, the Minister.
Well, when you say people are revolting en masse, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I see that, on the front page of the National, there's, the old headline or whatever. But I don't think that this is the talk of the steamy. I don't think it's the case that people in Aberdeen or Auchtermuchty are looking at the UK Internal Market Bill and saying this is a Trojan horse to the privatisation of the NHS. If you can find such people who do say that, who are not paid up members of the SNP, I'd be very interested to hear from them. But no, this is a totally confected political myth. And the truth, of course, is that what we're doing in this legislation is protecting the internal market and maintaining high standards. The one thing that a future European Union might choose to do, were we to stay in the European Union, is alter the rules of the game in a way that we couldn't control. So leaving the European Union not only strengthens the UK's institutions, it also strengthens the capacity of the UK and the devolved administrations to protect that which is dear to us.
I'm very keen to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask the questions they want to ask. So my plea for succinct questions and answers at the beginning, can we try to make sure that's abided by, please? Angela, Constance.
I'd like to put to Mr. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, hear you now. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to put to Mr. Gove some of the evidence that we heard last week from Professor Michael Dugan from Liverpool University. And I quote the Professor exactly when he said that the starting assumption for the bill seems to be the regulatory divergence by Scotland and Wales as a problem. It is not seen as an expression of local democracy or a valid search for different solutions to societal problems in Scotland and Wales, but a problem that needs to be managed. That starting assumption runs throughout the Bill's provision on non-discrimination and especially on mutual recognition. I wonder what Mr Gove's response is to the Professor.
I can put the Professor's mind at rest. That is not the starting assumption of the bill.
Okay, I suspect he would have been looking for a wee bit more detail. So another quote from Professor Dugan, he says that it is fair to say that there are two main factors that are particularly striking under the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill. The first is that it is in effect a cassis de Dijon on steroids. It takes the idea of mutual recognition, multiplies and magnifies it, and makes it a far stronger principle of mutual recognition than EU lawyers would recognise in the context of the single market. Secondly, it does not acknowledge the simple empirical fact that the UK internal market is unique in the world due to the size of the English economy and population relative to the size of other participating territories. Therefore, when you put these two factors together, there is a huge impact on devolution. And Mr Gove, comment to some of the detailed users' concerns.
Again, I would take gentle issue with the Professor. It is the case that the cassis de Dijon principle, which is at the heart of the EU single market, is one where there's a read across, which is that if something can be put legitimately on sale in one part of a single market or an internal market, then it can legitimately be put on sale in another part of it. Absolutely. But it's important to bear in mind why that's so. The UK internal market works to the benefit of every one of us. It is the case that 60% of Scotland's trade, or more than that, is with England and other parts of the UK. The Fraser-Allender Institute and others estimate that some 500,000 jobs or more depend on the unfettered access within the internal market that this legislation underpins. As we have been in the EU for 40 years, it has been single market rules that have governed the operation of the UK internal market. As we leave, we need new rules, but these new rules are such that the devolved administrations have more power than they did when we were in the EU. And that's critical. On the first point, the Internal Market Bill and indeed the position of the UK government overall is that devolution gives us the best of both worlds, both access to that internal market for every part of the United Kingdom, but also the Scottish Parliament and other devolved administrations legislating in the areas that are important to them. So whether that's on higher education funding, minimum pricing for alcohol, or the plastic bag charge, or whatever it might be, we welcome the innovation that devolved administrations show.
And would it be the case that if, for example, if the Scottish Government were minded to introduce a ban on, say, single-use plastics, that under this bill, that the Scottish authorities could indeed introduce such a ban and enforce it against Scottish producers, but would the problem be that they could not enforce it against imported goods from England or Wales?
Well, we'd have to look at what the legislation said, but if it were the case, for the sake of argument, that in Scotland that there were certain goods that were banned, then it would be the case that whether they were Scottish or English manufacturers, they'd be banned in that jurisdiction.
Okay, I think that's quite revealing. I'll leave it there just now, Convener. Thank you.
Yes. Dean Lockhart, please.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good afternoon, Mr Gove. My first question relates to the policy objectives behind the legislation. This committee has heard evidence from a number of stakeholders that maintaining free trade across the UK is essential to protect jobs and livelihoods in Scotland. In fact, Mr Gove, you mentioned that some 550,000 Scottish jobs rely on that free trade. On the other hand, the Scottish Government has said that this legislation is not required and is instead pursuing a policy of keeping pace with new EU legislation, which will likely create new trade barriers between Scotland and the rest of the UK. So I wonder if Mr Gove could share his views on the adverse impact of these new regulatory barriers, and can he also confirm the analysis that it would be Scotland that would suffer the most economic damage if we lose free trade access to the rest of the UK internal market?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Lockhart. The first thing to say is that the principle, as I understand it, of the continuity bill that the Scottish Government has been putting forward is entirely that it should keep pace with EU legislation. Let's imagine that the EU were to legislate in certain areas and the UK were not, or indeed that the UK were to legislate, which is entirely possible, for higher standards, but the Scottish Government were not to do that because it thought it was more important to keep pace with the EU. The consequence of that would be divergence, and divergence that would create strains on the internal market. That would work against the interests of Scotland's businesses and consumers. And it is the case, as you quite rightly point out, given the scale of trade in Scotland with the rest of the UK internal market and the dependence of so many businesses and so many jobs on that trade, that it would have an adverse effect. And so the bill is there to protect Scotland's jobs, protect the access of Scottish consumers to goods from elsewhere in the UK, to do that in the context of a devolved settlement. And also, it should be said that whatever admirable ideas might emerge in the EU, I'm sure it will be the case if they're very good, that they'll be adopted in the UK. Were they to be adopted by the Scottish Government simply for the sake of keeping pace with the EU, then it would be the case that that Scotland would not secure any additional market access as a result to the EU, but it might impede market access to the rest of the UK.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So, in essence, you would be concerned that the EU continuity bill could create these significant new barriers to trade and ultimately cost jobs in Scotland?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that answer. Can I move on? My next question relates to the hypothetical concerns that the UK government may lower regulatory standards in the context of future free trade agreements. However, when we look at the evidence, the revealed preference that you mentioned earlier, in many areas, the UK already has higher domestic standards than the EU. For example, in areas of health and safety, maternity leave, paternity leave, to name but a few. And in the first major free trade agreement signed by the UK government following Brexit, the Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan, this didn't result in any lowering of regulatory standards. So I wonder, Mr. Gove, would you be able to expand on the UK government's strategic priorities when negotiating future free trade agreements and indicate whether maintaining world-leading regulatory standards will be central to the UK government's approach to these free trade agreements?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right to say that we see our role in shaping the international trade agenda, not just in promoting free trade, but also in promoting higher standards. And whether that's looking at supply chains overall in order to make sure that we're promoting the highest environmental or animal welfare standards, or whether it's encouraging other nations to adopt the high standards that we have when it comes to employment and social rights, we absolutely do believe in maintaining and enhancing those standards. We won't sign free trade agreements that compromise those standards. And you're quite right in saying that while the EU has provided a floor for certain standards over the course of the last few years, that the UK government, under Conservative, Coalition and Labour Prime Ministers, has always aimed higher than the EU has.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Gove. That's all I had, Convener.
Thank you, Dean. Patrick Harvey, please.
Thank you, Convener. I also wanted to ask Mr. Gove about some of the evidence from Professor Duggan last week, in the hope that this time we might get an answer that amounts to saying more than just, oh no, it isn't. Professor Duggan said that within the EU, when issues around regulatory divergence crop up, effectively, it says it flags up to the European Commission that there is a trade barrier, a legitimate trade barrier, and that maybe the Commission should think about harmonisation. In that way, the emergence of legitimate trade barriers acts as a kickstart to the process of political dialogue, whereby the Member States and the EU institutions begin to think about how serious a problem it is and what the best solution is. He says the problem with this bill is that mutual recognition is not being used as a way of identifying problems so as to help find a political solution. In effect, the bill is saying we've identified a problem and we're going to solve it by sweeping away devolved competence. You can understand, Mr. Gove, surely, why no Scottish parliamentarian with a fundamental respect for the right of the people of Scotland to choose a government of their own interests would simply sweep aside these concerns from Professor Duggan and give consent to this bill.
Which competences would the bill sweep aside?
Well, we've had many examples of policy areas where these potential divergences might be seen as politically legitimate, but the UK government deciding otherwise. I think the first policy area mentioned in the white paper was on building regulations, which have been fully devolved since the start of devolution and were separately administered even before devolution. There is no basis for saying that a divergence that would potentially create a market barrier or a trade barrier within the UK could not be justified by the Scottish Government in public policy terms. And yet there are no exemptions or derogations in terms of achieving sustainability, social justice, or other public policy objectives. Whereas in the EU, there are. Why that difference?
Well, there's nothing in the bill, as far as I can see, that undermines high-quality building standards in Scotland or anywhere else in the United Kingdom. But I also think that there's a mischaracterisation of what happens in the EU. European Union law has direct effect in the United Kingdom, as long as the United Kingdom was in the European Union and until the transition period ends. If it is the case that any part of the European Union or any individual or any government of a member state acts contrary to European Union law, then infraction proceedings begin, and it's the CJEU that decides on those. And that is why there are a variety of things that either the Scottish Government might want to do or the UK Government might want to do that we cannot do while we're in the EU. So, to take a case in point, I mentioned earlier that if we wanted to ban the sale of fur, we can do that outside the EU. We cannot do it within the EU. And as Angela Constance mentioned earlier, there is a principle, the Cassis de Dijon principle, which is at the heart of the single market, which is essentially a non-discrimination principle. So I don't understand, what the problem is in having rules governing the internal market within the United Kingdom, which are more flexible than those of the European Union. And also, I don't understand where any existing devolved competence is infringed by this legislation. We haven't seen any example of that yet, but I'm obviously alert and alive to any that might be raised.
Well, clearly we haven't seen them happen yet because the bill isn't in place yet. But even the white paper, as I've said, does mention clearly devolved competences. Under this bill, if it's passed in the current form, if the UK took a view that a regulatory divergence, an example of regulatory divergence, caused a trade barrier and had to be resolved in this imposed way, but the Scottish Government said no, it's a reasonable, legitimate trade barrier. We think it's politically acceptable. Would the Scottish Government have the power to say, no, we're going to stick with our divergent policy? Or would they be overridden?
What sort of thing were you thinking of?
Well, I've already given you an example. Do you want me to give you more examples?
Well, the example that you gave didn't apply, so I'd like an example that's relevant.
Well, if you want to understand why building regulations are included, you should perhaps ask Mr. Sharma, who refused to give evidence to this committee.
But there's no impact on the higher standards of building regulations in Scotland or anywhere else in the UK. But so let's have a real example.
If the Scottish Government or the Scottish Parliament introduced a regulation on anything, whether it's the composition of goods, whether it's the manufacture of pretty much anything in Scotland, and the UK took the view that that creates a regulatory divergence which is unacceptable, where does the power lie to judge the political acceptability of that divergence? Does it lie entirely with the UK, or would it, as in Europe, be a process of negotiation and compromise? Because the bill seems to achieve nothing by way of negotiation or compromise, nor indeed does the process of developing this bill.
Well, first of all, you're completely wrong about the European Union. If it is the case that a government passes a law that runs contrary to EU law, then that doesn't prevail. If you look at the fact-obtained judgment, for example, it's not about negotiation and compromise, it's about the direct effect of EU law So you're wrong in that regard. On the prior question, again, I'm still looking for a hard, concrete example of a devolved competence, or the exercise of a devolved competence, which is infringed. Now, again, please put forward a specific proposal in the exercise of a devolved competence, where this bill would, in your view, lead to the that devolved competence not being able to be exercised appropriately.
Well, I think various members already have explored specific examples, and I'm aware of time. I've given you one set of examples on building standards, which are flagged up by the UK government in the white paper, and you've simply said it's not an issue. Well, I'm not sure why it would have been raised by your own government then. Given that we're short of time, can I ask you one final question, which is you do appear to me to have the bearing of someone who is required to ask for consent, but who doesn't ultimately care whether consent is given. Are you able to reassure the committee and the Scottish Parliament that the UK will not pass this legislation in respect of devolved areas without the consent of the Scottish Parliament?
Well, not we, under the Sewell Convention, do not normally proceed with legislation if it touches on devolved competences without the consent of a devolved administration. And so far, we've managed to secure legislative consent motions for lots of bills, including, I believe, the Agriculture and the Trade Bill, and we're grateful to the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government for doing so. But leaving the European Union is not a normal occurrence. It is an exceptional one. I hope that we will secure a legislative consent motion, but of course, it's vitally important that we safeguard the UK internal market.
So you don't actually care about whether we consent or not?
Oh, I do. And that's why I'm appearing here. That's why we're having this conversation, because as the various bogus arguments against the bill are exploded, so I hope more and more people will realise that it is a useful, indeed helpful piece of legislation that strengthens devolution. And as such, I hope that as people have cause to reflect, support for the legislation will therefore be forthcoming from Holyrood. Nothing would give me greater pleasure.
And if it isn't, you won't legislate.
Patrick, I'll need to move on, but give others the opportunity to ask questions. George Adam, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, Mr. Gove. Mr. Gove, you mentioned earlier on that the United Kingdom is more than its sum of its parts, and one of these parts obviously is Northern Ireland. And there's been much discussion with regards to Northern Ireland around the internal UK market and the proposals that you've currently made. With clauses 42, 43 and 45, the European Parliament has been clear that it won't ratify any EU-UK deal unless those clauses are dropped. They've gone as far to say in the quote I've got here in front of me is, should the UK authorities breach or threaten to breach the withdrawal agreement through the United Kingdom internal market in its current form or in any other way, the European Parliament under no circumstances will ratify any agreement between the EU and the UK. Now, my question would be quite simple, quite straightforward. Are you dropping clauses 42, 43 and 45? And if you aren't, why aren't you?
No, we're not. And the reason that we're not is that we want to make sure that the UK internal market is secure in the event of a non-negotiated outcome in the conversations that we're having with our European friends and partners over the future relationship. And the specific clauses are there in order to safeguard the UK internal market. They govern or touch on a set of specific areas. One of them is export declarations from Northern Ireland into Great Britain. The Northern Ireland Protocol exists to both defend the UK internal market and to grant unfettered access to Northern Ireland for Northern Ireland goods to the rest of the UK, and also to help the UK support the EU in protecting its single market. It's a compromise in that regard. But there's no need for export declarations from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. It doesn't protect the single market, but it does bear on unfettered access. The other thing, of course, is that we want to make sure that both, when it comes to the definition of goods at risk of tariffs in the event of a non-negotiated outcome, we want to ensure that, as appropriate, that those goods which are not at risk, which are destined for Northern Ireland consumers, don't face tariffs, and we want to be able, if we can't secure agreement, to be in that position, and we also want to make sure that the state aid provisions, which apply quite properly in Northern Ireland, don't have reach back to the rest of the United Kingdom. But we hope that we will secure agreement in the negotiations with the EU on the future free trade agreement, and we also hope that if we don't, for any reason, that these issues can be resolved in the Joint Committee.
So you're on a bit of a wing and a prayer there. So for the sake of clauses 42, 43 and 45, you're quite willing to actually not compromise. You mentioned during your answer to myself there that it was a compromise, but surely the compromise would be to work with Europe and actually find a way to get around it and drop 42, 43 and 45.
Yes.
So you do believe that would be a compromise that could be done?
We do believe that we should compromise. We do believe that the Joint Committee is there in order to find an agreement, in order to make sure that the Northern Ireland Protocol and the withdrawal agreement work in everyone's interests, but we reserve the right to protect the United Kingdom and that we don't get agreement.
With the greatest respect, that's not what I asked. I asked, would you actually look at these 42, 43 and 45 and actually compromise on it itself? Because in this life, Mr. Grove, you don't always get what you want. You know, but can I ask?
And what we need is this legislation.
On the same point, Grove, I would just like to say that, you know, when I had a look at this, this opens up the door that there could be a potential. The Scottish Government have already said that Scottish Government ministers' responsibilities under the Ministerial Code could be breached. And I had a wee look just to see what it is. And 1.3 of the Ministerial Code says the Ministerial Code should be read against the background of overreaching duty on ministers to comply with the law, including international law and treaty obligations, and to uphold the administration of justice and to protect the integrity of public life. Now, if you take that into account, Mr. Gove, and the conversation we've had up until now, are you asking the Scottish Government to breach their own Ministerial Code?
No.
But you are, because effectively that will be the case. They'll be breaching international law.
No, I'm not asking Scottish Government ministers to do that, no.
But that
George,
is...
George, I think that's as far as you're going to get with that. I'm sorry.
Well, I've got a final... Okay then, no problem.
You've got one final question.
Well, it was just one final question on the general, the whole idea of the devolved nations and all living in the United Kingdom and having respect for one another. I understand that Northern Ireland Assembly has passed a motion rejecting the internal market bill already. And is the UK government planning to ignore the voices of the devolved nations and just press ahead with legislation regardless? Because some of the evidence we've received is basically you've got the power in this scenario with the internal market bill.
No, we're working with the devolved administrations in order to make sure that we can secure not just agreement on common frameworks where work is going on, but also that the benefits of the internal market bill and the benefits of the internal market can be appreciated and shared by all.
Okay, thank you, George. Alexander Burnett, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. Now, there's been some concern that the Office of the Internal Market is going to be able to overrule decisions made by the devolved administrations. I just wonder if you're able to allay those concerns today.
I hope so, Mr. Burnett. One of the things that we do want to do is to make sure that we can work on common frameworks to uphold common standards. And to be fair to all the governments of the United Kingdom, there has been continued and energetic progress on common frameworks over the course of the last few weeks and months.
Thank you, that's very reassuring. Can I also just finally ask why this office is going to be sitting within the CMA and how you propose to go about appointing people to it?
Well, again, the Competition and Markets Authority has a UK-wide brief, and it's there to ensure fair competition overall. But one of the things that we would want to do is to make sure that we work with devolved administrations and others in order to make sure that its work could command confidence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Tom Arthur, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon. Mr. Gove, Schedule 2 lists services to which mutual recognition does not apply. One of those services is healthcare services. Can you explain to the committee why healthcare services is listed in Schedule 2, Part 1?
Yes, because we wanted to be absolutely and unambiguously clear that our NHS is not for sale.
Is that the reason why? What would the consequences be if healthcare services was not listed in Schedule 2, Part 1?
Well, again, it provides additional clarity and emphasis, underlines the importance of the shared commitment that all of us give to the NHS.
Well, that's reassuring. I appreciate that. In the bill as amended, Clause 17.2, it gives the Secretary of State power to remove entries in the table at Part 1. Why is that power in place to allow the Secretary of State, through regulations, to remove entries in Schedule 2, Part 1?
Well, the power should always be there for additions as well to be made. Ultimately, the Secretary of State is the decision maker, but it's obviously the case that decisions on this would only be taken after appropriate thought and consultation.
Okay, so healthcare services is listed within the schedule, and the bill confers a power on a Secretary of State with a statutory instrument to remove healthcare services. Was any consideration given to putting healthcare services on a permanent footing so that it could not be removed from the schedule?
Well, again, we will always listen to any fairly expressed request from any politician or any party in order to further strengthen the protections that we give to the NHS.
So would the UK Government consider an amendment to this legislation to ensure that healthcare services cannot be removed from Schedule 2 via regulations?
Well, it's already the case we believe that there is firm protection as a result of the provisions that exist within the bill, but of course we're always happy to discuss with the devolved administrations and others. But again, I should stress that there's no one in UK politics at the moment, nor should I imagine there would be ever, who would wish to undermine the basis on which the NHS is constituted and its services are provided.
Oh, I appreciate that entirely, and I very much welcome the fact that healthcare services is included within Schedule 2, because, to use your words, our healthcare services are not for sale. My only point being is that healthcare services can be removed from Schedule 2 via an affirmative instrument, but not only can it be removed via an affirmative instrument, it can be removed via the made affirmative resolution procedure as provided for in Clause 17.4. So what I want to ask Mr Gove is, why is the UK Government giving itself the power to remove healthcare services from Schedule 2 Part 1 immediately after the bill is passed for up to 3 months without Parliament having a say? I'm just curious as to why that power is there. If you, like me, want to see healthcare services provided and you think there's no likelihood of anyone wanting to sell off our NHS, I have a provision in the legislation which, following your logic, would allow this to happen. Well,
it is the case, as we both recognise, that we want to make sure that the NHS is not for sale. And the reason that it's there is in order to provide that additional reassurance. It's a bit like the amendment on the minimum unit pricing for alcohol. It's putting there in capital letters what was always our intent. And one of the things that we have sought to do is, there are some voices, I know not yours, that would seek to scaremonger on this issue. And the reason it's there is in order to provide that reassurance that actually there is no impact, there could never be and will never be on our NHS.
Yeah, I agree, Mr Gove. I don't want to see anyone scaremongering. I think the way we could avoid any scaremongering is to ensure that the protection of healthcare services is not in a schedule which can be amended by the Secretaries of State. It's on the face of the protected and can only be altered through primary legislation. So I'll ask you again, will the Government give consideration to an amendment to ensure that healthcare services cannot be removed from Schedule 2 via a Secretary of State using the affirmative procedure or the made affirmative procedure for the first 3 months?
Well, I take your point, Tom, and I will look at the legislation because we want to provide people with absolute reassurance on that. But of course, the legislation has been framed in a particular way in order to make sure that our internal market can operate. And one of the things that I should say is that we don't believe at all in any way in allowing our NHS to be traded away. But there are a thicket of provisions that safeguard the position of the NHS and other legislation. But I'm more than happy to discuss with you and with others any additional safeguards that may be thought to be required.
Okay, but finally, you would recognise the bill as it currently stands would allow the Secretary of State to remove healthcare services from Schedule 2 within the first 3 months of the bill being passed. So without a parliamentary vote, a Minister, a Secretary of State, could remove healthcare services within the first 3 months of this legislation being passed, which were to follow your logic, allow our healthcare services to be sold off. I obviously don't believe that's going to be the case, of course, but it is a legal possibility as the bill is currently drafted, is it not, Mr. Gove?
Well, I'm glad that you acknowledge that it's not going to come to pass, because there are some people who do take that conspiracist view, but I'm reassured that you don't.
Yeah, well, it comes down to a matter of trust, but clearly when the government's pushing forward legislation which is regarded as breaking international law, trust is at a premium. But anyway, thank you, Convener. No further questions.
Okay, Jackie Bailey, please.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good afternoon, Mr. Gove. Colleagues have obviously explored with you the details about the substance of the bill, but I want to take a step back and ask about process, because I think it's fair to say that there have been a variety of views about the bill, everything from polite reservations to outright hostility. And it certainly appears that the devolved nations have serious concerns remaining. So on that basis, is there an opportunity to pause and get the consensus necessary, or are you just going to railroad the bill through?
Well, it's a very fair point, Jackie, that you make, and there have been, as you quite rightly say, a variety of different responses. We want to make sure that, and this committee hearing is part of that process, that people appreciate what is and what is not in the bill. Now, we do need to have the legislation in place by the 31st of December, because that's when the transition period ends. That's when single market rules fall away. But if there is more that the UK government can and should do in order to explain the intent behind the bill and to build support for it, then of course we will.
Let me just press you on that point, because as I read it currently, you have a number of the devolved nations likely to withhold consent for the bill as it stands. Will you therefore pause and negotiate again with them?
No, we won't pause on the implementation of the bill, but what we will seek to do is to properly and better understand any concerns. It is the case that if there are ways in which the bill can be improved, not least in the House of Lords, then we will take the opportunity to do so. The essential purpose of the bill, to make sure that we have a functioning UK internal market, is one that is shared by the Welsh Government and by the Northern Ireland Executive. Issues have been raised about aspects of the bill. We will work in good faith with those administrations to try to find an answer. But ultimately, we do need to ensure that we have a functioning statute book on January the 1st of next year.
Okay. The other thing that I think the debate around the bill illustrates is the need for perhaps new institutional architecture to make it work. And I'm thinking in particular of a disputes resolution mechanism between governments, never mind anybody else. Do you think the proposals as they stand within the bill are sufficiently robust to enable that to happen?
Well, again, it's a very good point. I'd say two things. The first thing is that in our attempt to find consensus on a way forward, we have been working with the governments on approaches towards the internal market. The Scottish Government withdrew from our internal market work strand a wee while back, and we regretted that. On your point about dispute resolution, in parallel with this bill, we're working with the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations to look again at the whole structure of intergovernmental relations. Dispute resolution is part of that. And while those conversations are ongoing, I hope it will be the case that we can find a way of having a robust dispute resolution mechanism with independent advice, which people can have confidence in.
I'm conscious of time, Convener, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. John Mason, please.
Thanks very much, Convener. I was wondering if I could ask Mr. Gove around the area of professional qualifications and specifically teachers. I mean, for quite a long time, teacher qualifications have been different in Scotland, and I think some of them are a bit worried that if there's got to be mutual recognition of professional qualifications, that anyone could come in from the rest of the UK and teach in Scotland without meeting the normal Scottish standards.
I don't believe that the bill would allow that to happen. No, I think it is the case that it has no impact on the provision of educational services. No.
But it does have impact on professional qualifications.
But it wouldn't lead to any change in the way in which Scotland would regulate its education system.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of it was that, I mean, for example, I'm an accountant, so generally speaking, a Scottish or an English and Welsh accountant can switch over and work in either place, but that isn't currently the case for teachers.
No.
In Scotland, a teacher has to have a degree, I think, in the subject they're teaching in, which I don't think is necessarily the case in England.
Three things that I'd say. Firstly, it is the case that there are distinctions in professional qualifications. So it is the case, for example, that, as you know, by definition, Scots law is a different legal system to that in England, and English lawyers can't appear in Scots courts except after acquiring appropriate qualifications or with particular permission. And in the same way, the regulation of what happens in Scotland's schools is for Scotland's government. But sadly, it is not the case that every teacher in Scotland has a degree in the subject which they teach. Would that it were so? And one of the problems, of course, that we've seen over the course of the last 13 years is a decline in educational standards in Scotland relative to other parts of the United Kingdom. And that is a source of deep regret. But of course, there's a live debate in Scotland about how we can improve educational standards.
But, well, I suppose my final point then on that would be if theoretically, which I don't accept, there was a problem with Scottish education and we're trying to improve it, then one way of improving it would be to raise the kind of professional standard of teachers here. But would we be able to do that if that was going to exclude teachers from elsewhere?
Well, again, I think it's entirely for Scotland to regulate who can teach in Scottish schools. But one of the things that I would say is that because of the approach that the Scottish Government has taken towards inspection, towards examinations, and towards the curriculum, we have less information about what's working well and not so well in Scottish schools compared to other parts of the United Kingdom. And that's why I think it's critically important that, as well as additional investment in tuition for those students who've fallen further behind, as has been put forward by Douglas Ross, that we also have more information for parents about how schools are performing so that we can learn from the best schools in Scotland and support the weaker schools in Scotland. That had, I believe, been the approach that the Scottish Government wanted to take in the past but chose not to pursue. But I agree with you. Improving the quality of education in Scotland is something that's close to all our hearts, because we want to make sure that Scottish children are well educated, and then in the United Kingdom they can take advantage of the economic opportunities the internal market provides.
Right, I'm going to a supplementary from Angela Constance. I'm going to allow that because we need to get back to the bill and some of this extraneous nonsense that I'm hearing at the moment. Angela,
I'm sorry that you I thought they were very upfront.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Indeed, back to the Internal Market Bill, specifically Clause 48, which amends the Scotland Act to explicitly reserve to Westminster, I quote, regulation of the provision of subsidies which are or may be distortive or unharmful by a public authority to persons supplying goods or services in the course of a business. I'm talking about state aid here. And the Scottish Trade Union Congress said that the bill does not detail what these regulations might be or what implications there may be for devolved decision-making and the devolved settlement. Effectively, it reserves state aid to Westminster, despite this not currently being reserved in the Scotland Act. It's quite hard to see how this is not a power grab by the UK government, Mr Gove, is it not?
No, it's very easy to see how this isn't a power grab at all. At the moment, the state aid rules are governed by EU law. The EU is, as we know, in the negotiations between the UK government and the EU at the moment, very interested in state aid because it's been able to control how state aid is allocated by its member states. It is the case that when it comes to making sure that any government approach towards state aid complies with WTO and other international rules, that it's the government which deals with international relations which is responsible for that. International relations is a reserved matter, so it's only right that we set the groundwork, but it's also that within that, the groundwork having been set, the Scottish Government would retain the power within that overall framework to provide state aid and other support for enterprises in Scotland as appropriate. But as I say, it will be the case that we will be taking on the responsibility that the EU has hitherto organised. But of course, there'll be more money to support Scotland outside the European Union, because, as you know, we currently send some £20 billion or so to the EU every year. We only get about £10 billion of that back. Outside the EU, we'll be able to spend that money for ourselves. We'll be able to spend it on the people's priorities, and that means that we'll also be able to support the Scottish Government in supporting those economic enterprises that are crucial to Scotland's economic future and well-being. So it's a win-win.
Okay, we've reached 4:30. I thank Mr Gove for his evidence today. We'll continue our scrutiny of the Internal Market Bill at 9:30 tomorrow morning. We'll then hear from the Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, Europe and External Affairs. I now close this meeting.